Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, the South African Federation of Trade Unions has warned the working class and the poor to expect yet another anti-worker and anti-poor budget when the Minister of Finance tables his budget. The union was referring to the medium-term budget policy statement which was delivered last year in October. What they mentioned is that this budget will deepen any budget cuts, undermine public service and entrench what they term the neoliberal economic agenda that has left millions of South Africans in poverty and unemployment. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome SAFTU National Spokesperson Newton Masuku. Newton, good day. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Good day and thanks for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure. I think, Newton, one of the biggest concerns that SAFTU has raised is austerity measures. Are you expecting something similar in tomorrow's budget speech?
Yeah, we in fact expect the intensification of the austerity measures themselves, and this we base our argument on the previous medium-term budget policy statement, in which the National Treasury was explicitly clear that it intends to increase the primary budget surplus by 1.8%, and that it intends to reduce aggressively the deficit spending. And we know that that is the language of austerity, that is the language of budget cuts. And therefore, services rendered to the public, services such as education, health, policing, such as home affairs for people where people apply for passports and all manner of things, documentations, are going to suffer a great deal. So we take serious issue with that. And that's why we framed the statement in the way that we did, to warn the working class of what is coming.
Yeah. The previous guest I had, Yasmin Suleiman, who specializes in tax, said taxpayers are fed up of any supposed talk of increases. They're fed up because they're not really seeing public services, they're not really seeing infrastructure being maintained, they're not really seeing any social services being maintained at a level South Africans deserve it to be. Should a treasury go ahead and raise any taxes? I mean, surely this would, in many ways, really infuriate taxpayers. Is that the view that SAFTU is looking at also?
Yeah, but we take the view from a perspective of the working class itself. In fact, in the protest that we'll be engaging on tomorrow, we call for the taxing of the rich and the wealthy in this country. So our contention is that tax must not be regressive, it must be progressive. In other words, those who earn more or to contribute more to society to be able to, as you pointed out, have infrastructure, to be able to hire teachers, more nurses, and so on and so forth. So indeed, if for instance, the Minister of Finance were to increase the value-added tax, we would take serious issue with that, because as it is, the working class cannot afford to make ends meet. And therefore, we would take serious issue with that, and we would mobilize intensely to push back against that onslaught.
Newton, on taxing the wealth, I mean, there's this big discussion. President Cyril Ramaphosa, in selling South Africa as the G20 president, has said that, well, there has to be a 15% on the billionaires and the trillionaires across the world. Do you foresee government starting off at home and really implementing a tax for the wealthy?
Highly improbable in our view. We wish for it, but we do not think that without at least pressure on our part would see it. Because, I mean, you must remember that the government of national unity conceptualizes how society ought to progress by appeasing private capital. And therefore, to appease private capital, you must lower your taxes, you must make it easier for them to hire and fire, and do all manner of things. In other words, you must make what they call in neoliberal talk the environment for business to be conducive, for business to thrive. And therefore, you would not, indeed, if you hold that position on the one hand, proceed to raise taxes on the rich and the wealthy in this country. You would want to incentivize them. And to do that, you would not touch their taxes. If anything, you would want to decrease it. So we don't expect anything of the sort. It was just perhaps a general talk.
Yeah, I mean, I had a chat with SAFTU last year with regards to the GNU and economics, and a lot of the discussion was that there's going to be a conflict in terms of how the GNU partners view the fiscus of the country. Is the GNU in conflict? And I ask this because, of course, you've got land expropriation, where there seems to be a conflict there. There seems to be one, especially on the national health insurance bill. So do you, from a GNU perspective, foresee some sort of discussions that are happening? Because Treasury does have GNU partners, especially from the Democratic Alliance, where there's discussion on taxing the wealth, there's discussion on raising a VAT or any personal income tax will come into the equation with regards to that. And also, by the way, a public service, which is, of course, something that SAFTU has reiterated on quite a number of occasions.
Yes, I mean, we have pointed out in a number of our statements that the GNU will represent the intensification of what has already been happening for the past 30 years. In fact, I mean, since 1996, when the ANC adopted GEAR, which was the homegrown neoliberal version of South Africa, you began to see an obsession, a neurotic obsession with what they call budget surpluses and an attempt to consolidate the budget in an attempt to have all manner of things. So, I mean, the GNU in its statement of intent is explicit on this question. It says we want what we call fiscal discipline. In other words, the state must not spend willy-nilly. And by willy-nilly, they do not just mean wasteful expenditure. What they really mean is that you must not spend, the state must not spend in excess of the revenue it collects. And that, by definition, is the formula for austerity. So we expect the intensification of that going forward, because the parties to the GNU indeed have agreed that fiscal discipline ought to be the bedrock on which they are going to build the economy. So we expect the intensification.
Newton, I want to touch on the public servants. There's been a lot of discussions, even within the tripartite alliance of the African National Congress, COSATU, saying, well, more needs to be done in this budget speech to try and open up the opportunity for more funds to be flown into the public service. Is that something that SAFTU is confident about, or is there, from a negative point of view, going to be more cuts within that part of government service, which would mean ultimately, and this would be a sad point to it, the cutting of many jobs, which would contribute towards South Africa's unemployment figures?
Yeah, well, indeed. I mean, just towards the conclusion of last year, we saw there was stories breaking that in the Western Cape, about 2,400 teachers would not be reemployed. Their contract would not be extended. The same with the KZN, the same with the Northwest, I think the same with Mpumalanga, and so on and so forth. So we expect more of this slashing and burning when the minister comes tomorrow. Because, as I've said, the very basis on which the GNU conceives of budget, of government finances is budget, it's fiscal discipline. And therefore, we do not expect any attempt, one, to increase the public sector headcount, but also to make sure that, health, education, and all other very important departments on which the working class relies to reproduce itself would be increased. We expect tomorrow to be really a bloodbath in our view.
Bloodbath. I want to talk on state-owned entities. Last year, Minister Gondongwana said that the SOEs would need to reevaluate themselves and that there wouldn't be willy-nilly handing out of bailouts. What is SAFTU's take with regards to any potential bailouts that could occur tomorrow, should there be a need for it from the SOE part, but also from Treasury?
Well, we don't expect anything of the sort. In fact, the GNU has adopted what it calls the medium-term development plan. And at the core of it is what they call Operation Vulindlela. And Operation Vulindlela, if you study it, it opens the door for privatization to water, energy, transport, and all of that. So it says these services can only be best rendered to society if you allow the private sector to enter through what they call private-public partnerships, as guided by the World Bank, of course. And therefore, we don't expect that they would want to open the door for the private sector to enter, wherein the whole of society will carry the risk of the investment of the private sector, and the private sector, of course, will reap the rewards as they become profitable. And as they begin to exclude more and more, because history has shown that as you allow the profit motive to begin to dictate how services in society ought to be distributed, more and more people become unable to afford, and therefore it excludes the overwhelming majority of the working class. So that's what we have.
Yeah. Newton, yes, I think one that's going to be of interest to all of us and of benefit to all of us is that, of course, everyone wants to see South Africa's GDP grow. The IMF and the World Bank says, okay, so South Africa can reach 3% if they meet certain conditions. One of them, of course, consistent energy, and the other two, of course, infrastructure development and the sort of austerity measures that would need to be kept under control from Treasury. That 3%, South Africa has sold they can achieve this during the recently concluded World Economic Forum in Davos. Given the way the GDP is growing, given the supposed questions about energy security, the lack of infrastructure that South Africa can provide, or the lack of consistent infrastructure that South Africa can provide, is SAFTU confident that South Africa can reach this 3% GDP growth, or is this just a pie in the sky that is a fantasy being sold to investors outside of the country?
Well, not a chance. I mean, the likes of the IMF and the World Bank, what they are proposing as the pathway to achieving that particular 3% is what they've always proposed, and is what the ANC government has always implemented. Fiscal discipline, the government must not spend, you must open the door for business, and so on and so forth. So we do not foresee in any way, shape, or form the reaching of the 3% to which they've set for themselves. But secondly, the National Treasury itself, in its last medium-term budget policy statement, it paints a conservative view of it expects in the next 3 years to grow by 1.8% at best. And the National Treasury always revises downwards its view. So this notion that if you were to fix this, that, and the other, you are going to see growth of 3% is a pipe dream, and we do not think it will materialize.
Newton Masuku, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's Newton Masuku. He's the SAFTU national spokesperson. Well, all is set for tomorrow's budget speech on Hilaal TV. Of course, we'll be bringing you the build-up and the review of the budget speech. Don't forget to join us at 1:30 tomorrow on DSTV channel 347. For myself, for Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.